Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren. This month we read Richard Steele's Great White Kangaroo by Zachary J D'Argonne. It was provided to us by the author himself. Thank you, Zach, for sending us copies of your debut novel.
Like always, we'll split the podcast into two sections. First, a spoiler-free discussion and our overall group score, and then a more in-depth discussion of the plot and the ending, which is obviously going to be spoiler-heavy, as well as our individual scores for the book. First, let's talk about the author. Zach D'Argonne lives in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, with his beautiful wife, Meredith, daughter, Cecilia, and their dog, Chipper. He earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Denver in creative writing and psychology. Zach has a Master's of Science from Columbia University School of Social Work with an emphasis in child and adolescent grief and trauma therapy. And as Lauren said, this is his first novel. And now Barbara is going to tell us about some of the specs of the book.
Okay, so this was originally published on December 14th of 2020. It is romance or new adult fiction. It is 306 pages. It has not been nominated or won any awards yet.
And Lauren, you want to read us the back of the book?
Yes. So the back of the book says, unmistakably plain, Richard Steele is floating through his mediocre senior year of high school. Nothing beyond the newest Batman comic or Star Wars movie matters much to Rick until the day Rosie Todd moved to his hometown of Aurora, Colorado. Rosie is a one-of-a-kind, once-in-a-lifetime kind of girl that all of the guys want. A kind of girl Rick wants. For all of the strengths that Rick possesses, his good looks, wittiness, and an above-average intellect, Steele is tormented by demons and consumed by temptation. Richard Steele's Great White Kangaroo is a page-turning, laugh-out-loud, brutally honest, eye-opening twist on the classic boy meets girl story. In the debut novel from Zachary J D'Argonne, we get a true glimpse into the chaotic mind, heart, and soul of a teenage boy.
All right, so like always, what did you guys think of Richard Steele's Great White Kangaroo? And remember, no spoilers. And I will let Barbara start on this one.
I was a bit underwhelmed with this book. It's decently well written, and it is funny at times, but I think it missed a mark for me. I wasn't a fan of the two main characters, but I did enjoy, and I really enjoyed the side characters. I found the main character of Rick to be very problematic, as well as Rosie as well. I also don't think I was the targeted audience, though, so maybe that's why I felt a little underwhelmed with the book, since I am not a teenage male.
That's news to me. I had thought you were a teenage boy.
Surprise. It's me, Mario, instead.
So for me, I enjoyed the book for the most part. There are definitely some problematic parts of the book that we're going to talk about later, and then on the spoiler free section, or no, the full of spoilers section. What am I saying? So it was entertaining to read. There were some parts that were funny. One of the things that the author did in the book was he broke the fourth wall a lot, which I think when done well could be really entertaining. So that was fun. But there were also parts that were super heavy hitting, so that was interesting as well. One part I would specifically like to highlight here, if it doesn't involve spoilers, is that I thought that the way that the author wrote relationships and dialogue specifically in those relationships, they all felt very real, and the dialogue felt very natural. It was that I really liked the way that the relationships were written between friends and romantic partners and family. It all felt very real to me. And truthfully, that was probably my favorite part of the book, was the various relationships in it, whether it's Rick and somebody else or those side characters having their own relationships. Those were all very well done.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I agree with both of you in certain aspects. So I also think that Rick and Rosie are both problematic in their own way, that we'll talk about later. But I also agree with Michael that I liked the writing, and I think that the dialogues were really well done. I think that it seemed natural. You felt like you were kind of a part of a conversation that was happening, and some of it felt like true, teenage conversation. And so I think that Zach did a good job of kind of making the dialogue such that you felt like you were involved in it. I also liked the relationships. Not all the relationships, but I liked the relationship that Rick had with his mom, and I liked a lot of the side characters, like Barbara, like you said as well. So definitely had some good things going for it.
So like you guys know, we're not going to go into our individual ratings at this point. You got to wait for that. But our group score for this one was a 6.25 out of 10. So at least it was a clean decimal from you guys. It wasn't something crazy like a 6.3 repeating or something like last time. So yeah, that was our group rating. Next question, as always, again, would you recommend this book? I'll start on this one. And my answer there is I think so, with some caveats. So like I would recommend it to some people. I literally wrote down in the notes, like I wouldn't recommend it to my mom, but some of my friends probably so. I don't think I'd recommend it to the women in my life to read, my mom included, or my sister Lauren, who's on the podcast. I don't know if I would recommend it to her or Barbara if I had read it without them. So yeah, that's. I think I would recommend it to some of my male friends. So I'd recommend it to some people, but it'd be a kind of limited audience recommendation. Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I think that I would be curious to hear what the intended target audience was for this one, whether it is like fellow teenage boys or more older males that lived through their teenage years and kind of are reminiscing on it. I feel like that would be more of the demographic that I would probably recommend it to. I probably would not recommend it to my female friends, though.
Yeah, just to sound like a parrot here, I definitely would, I hate saying definitely, would not recommend it to any of my women friends, because maybe someone out there might enjoy this, but I think the book is more targeted to the male audience. I think some of the jokes and some of the stuff that happens to guys, I don't think as a female, I don't think I got that as much. So maybe I missed the mark on that part, but I guess I would recommend it to some of my male friends.
Yeah,
Michael.
I mean, I think that's one of those things that it doesn't just plague this book, right? Like it's when you're writing a coming of age story and it's explicitly written from one gender's perspective, it's something that if other people may not be able to identify with as much, and they wouldn't. I guess maybe I don't know. Maybe that's a similar problem with other coming of age stories. I don't know.
I don't know. Have you read a female coming of age story? Like
That's the thing. I don't think I have. I couldn't come up with an example. I was thinking like, have I ever read this from the other perspective? I've read YA novels, and sometimes those books are from the female perspective, and that main character is like in high school or something, but it's not. It's like a fantasy novel or something, right? It's not a coming of age story.
Right. It's different. Like the only one I can think of, it was like, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margot, or something like that. Like I would not recommend that for a dude, because that's literally just based for women, right? Like, right, Lauren? Uh-huh. So maybe that's the case for this as well.
It's the male version.
Yeah, right. It literally. So I guess I would be curious to know who the targeted audience was for this, because I personally don't think it was maybe made for me. I mean, it's interesting to see how guys think, if this really is how it is, and some of the information that I got is very eye-opening, so I guess there's that.
Peek behind the curtain. For those of you leaving us at this point, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us. That's really important. So if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or wherever you listen, give us a rating, give us a review. Super helpful for us. Also, if you don't already, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. In both places, our handle is @BadassLitPod. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you've got a book that you think that we should read, let us know. We'd love to add your recommendation to our list. And now Lauren is going to give us a short preview of what we've got coming up next month.
Yes, next month we are reading When We Believed in Mermaids by Barbara O'Neill, which was recommended to us by Kayla Price. The back of the book for that one is as follows. Josie Bianchi was killed years ago on a train during a terrorist attack, gone forever. It's what her sister Kit, an ER doctor in Santa Cruz, has always believed. Yet all it takes is a few heart-wrenching seconds to upend Kit's world. Live coverage of a club fire in Auckland has captured the image of a woman stumbling through the smoke and debris. Her resemblance to Josie is unbelievable and unmistakable. With it comes a flood of emotions, grief, loss, and anger that Kit finally has a chance to put to rest by finding the sister who's been living a lie. After arriving in New Zealand, Kit begins her journey with the memories of the past, of days spent on the beach with Josie, of a lost teenage boy who'd become part of their family, and of a trauma that has haunted Kit and Josie their entire lives. Now, if two sisters are to reunite, it can only be by unearthing long-buried secrets and facing a devastating truth that has kept them apart for far too long. To regain their relationship, they may have to lose everything.
Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
Should be an interesting book. We'll get there next month. So remember, guys, the second part of our podcast is an in-depth look at this book. So if you do want to read it, please stop listening now and come back when you're done so nothing gets spoiled for you.
Hey guys, my name's Abby and I co-host the Book Life podcast with my best friend Mo. We cover fantasy, sci-fi, and historical fiction books and talk book-related topics like our favorite character types, world building, and books versus their movies. New episodes drop every Monday on your favorite platform. Now, back to your show.
Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So, to start it off like we always start this off, let's start with the Badass Character Award and our personal nominations. I will let Barbara start on this and nominate a character.
I would recommend Sandy, Rick's mom, because I feel like she's the only non-problematic female character in this book. And my second pick would have to be Drew, who's also the only non-problematic male character. So, Badass Character Award goes to both of them.
No, the Badass Character Award goes to Steph. Because I feel like I liked him from the beginning, even though he was kind of an asshole. But then, to see his story unfold was cool too. But I also enjoyed Rick's mom.
So Rick's mom was also a close second for me, but Steph was my pick for the Badass Character Award. I agree with Lauren that he was not the nicest person, the first part of the book, but I really liked the way his character developed, and especially how things are at the end of the book when he and Drew get engaged, and like getting to see all of that was really cool. So Steph is my pick. Because Lauren and I both picked Steph. Steph gets the Badass Character Award this month with a close runner-up second of Sandy, Rick's mom.
Rick's mom has got it going.
She does not own the trademark for that song. No. So moving on from there, what did you like about this book? What did you not like about this book? And was there a specific point in the book that really hooked you in? And I'll start on this one. So I feel like it's bad to say this, but is it bad to say that I liked almost all of the other characters except for the main character and his love interest? There are aspects of Rick's character that I liked. I thought that there were moments where he got some really good character development. I enjoyed reading about his relationship with his mom. I enjoyed the little bits that we got of him confronting like the demons of his past with his father, but I feel like we didn't get a lot of closure there. I enjoyed seeing him go through therapy and start working on his issues, but again, never really got closure on that either. So I really liked Steph as a character throughout the whole book. I really liked Drew, his roommate in college. Both fun to read, both fun perspectives. Overall, I liked the story, but there were a lot of things in the story that I didn't like, if that makes sense. And I think that the book was trying to tell like 8 stories at the same time and mash all of those together into this one book. And I feel like because of that, we didn't really get a conclusion to a lot of those pieces of the puzzle that I would have really liked to have gotten. So I liked and disliked the book for different reasons. As far as what really hooked me into the book, I don't know actually what moment really hooked me in. It was probably, I don't know, it was probably near the end of high school, like when college was about to start. I think I was more interested in the college section of the book than I was the high school section of the book. But I mean, to be honest, the whole book was interesting. So there really wasn't a whole hook. my favorite thing that the author did that I guess kept me going in the book was his fourth wall breaks, like I mentioned before. So the author is constantly breaking the fourth wall and making nerdy jokes about comics that I read as a kid and still read as an adult, and Star Wars movies and TV shows and other stuff like that. And that was all very enjoyable. I really liked that stuff. So that was actually probably the thing I liked most about the book was the fourth wall breaking that the character did. I thought that was pretty entertaining. Lauren, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I find that ironic because the fourth wall breaking was one of my gripes. And that's just simply a preference in style. Because I feel like I felt like it just happened more often than I would have liked, I guess. I think that there's a good time to break the fourth wall and like have it timed appropriately to where it's effective. And I feel like the author did that sometimes. And sometimes the placement was like, oh, that was a really good spot for like some light humor or whatever. But then other times it was just like, oh my goodness, like this is a lot of fourth wall breaking. I don't even know what wall I'm looking at anymore. So it's funny that was something that you really liked, because that was something that I didn't hate it, but it wasn't my favorite thing. As far as like what I liked about the book, like I said before, I liked the dialogue and I really enjoyed some of the side characters. I liked the portrayal that the author made of teen relationships, not romantically, but like friendships. I think that the Steph character and like bringing him out of his shell, like I think that that's kind of a trope that you see in middle and high school quite a bit. Like there's always that one friend that's a little bit more reserved, and then the other friend is more like ballsy or whatever. And so I felt like watching that or reading that and seeing that relationship, I enjoyed it. I disliked a lot of the romance piece. I think that there was just there's a lot of problems with it. And as far as a point that really hooked me in, I can't really think. I mean, so I guess what kept me reading was after the first, I don't know if it was the intro or the first chapter, but he was basically like, this is a story that's going to end happily or whatever. You know what I'm talking about? So like, this is going to end.
Where he's like, this is a happy
it's
ending.
Not it's not a sad story or whatever. And I was kind of mad at that because I was like, well, all right, you're either trying to fool us because later it's going to have a twist, or like you're literally just telling me how your book ends now. And so why do I have to read it now? But no. And then as I started reading and disliking the Rosie character a bit more, I was like, man, I hope that he was lying in that first chapter about him ending up with Rosie. So anyway, that was a long way of saying what you were asking.
That's all right. I mean, and in some ways, Lauren, I'm glad you mentioned that. He kind of was lying, right? Because it may have had like a happier ending, but it was not really a happy story. Like there were a lot of not happy things that happened in the life of Rick. But anyway, I'm going to stop interrupting. Barbara, you want to tell us your thoughts?
Yeah, so I really love the relationship that Rick had with his mom. I think it was really well written, and I loved how understanding she was with him and their whole dynamic. I thought it was done very well. I also enjoyed Rick and Drew's friendship, and honestly, most of Rick's friendship, like you guys both mentioned. I think the author did a really good job of writing that. I mean, some of the talk between guys, I guess, whatever. I know girls talk about stupid stuff too, so I get that. But I had to roll my eyes, and I was like, honestly, he did a good job, because I feel like it would be like a little Barbara fly on the wall listening to dudes talk or something. This is what I imagined guys talked about. He didn't disappoint, so I think he did that really well. I actually hated Steph until after high school, and then he got loads better. I think his character arc and stuff like that was done really well, and it kind of made sense how the author wrote him and what was going on with his life. I disliked how this book was just all over the place. I felt like it tried to cover too much, and the overall story got stretched too thin with too much going on. I think it would have been better. It would have been a better, more cohesive story if the author picked a few plots to focus on instead. The romance to me was non-existent, and it's supposed to be a romantic book. We only got a few scenes, and we're supposed to think that they're in love with each other at the end. I don't get that. I did not understand. To me, it felt more like an obsession instead of love. Rick having a random porn addiction didn't fit the story plot whatsoever for me. The Rick and his father story plot wasn't nearly as fleshed out as it should have been. I feel like it was a really good story to tell and very interesting, and I was very interested in that. But like, we would get a snippet of it, and then it wouldn't be mentioned for another few chapters, and it'd be like, it just kind of felt like, I need this to happen. How is this going to happen? Plot point. Here we go. Instead of being inside the cohesive story of the overall plot. Let's see here. Rick's anger issues were never really resolved for me. There was also, trigger warning, there was no need for the random rape scene in the book. It didn't add anything to the story whatsoever. It was never mentioned again. I feel like it was just added in there for shock value, and I did not enjoy that whatsoever. And don't get me started on all the problematic views of women that Rick and Steph sort of spewed early on in the chapter or in the book. At one point, I thought about not even finishing the book because I was so disgusted with their views on consent and how men just can't control themselves and have no willpower because, quote unquote, biology. That women dress just to please men, and how every man decides at one point in their life to not cheat anymore. I just felt like that was just, I just felt disgusted with that view. If the author was trying to show if that's really how guys think, then it's a little disturbing if that's the truth. I also didn't like that we don't get to see Rick grow as a character. Like, as being a main character, I feel like Steph got more of a character arc and growth out of his storyline than we did with Rick. I just feel like his character development felt more rushed to me. It was just kind of hard to like him because of that, so I didn't really connect with him because of that. I'm not opposed to unlikable characters, but I want to see a character development. Like, I want to know why I should root for them, or why I should, like, if they're an evil character or a bad character or whatever you want to call it, like, give me a good reason to hate him. He was just kind of a bleh character for me. And to be a main character, to be just a bleh character kind of sucks. Luckily, all the other characters was great besides Rosie. I also wasn't a huge fan of her either. But, like, Steph was great. Drew was amazing. His mom was just a freaking angel. Like, I loved her. So that's kind of how I felt about that.
Yeah. As a man, I'll touch on what Barbara said too. And I also was frustrated about that chapter that she's referencing. It paints it in a way that, well, I guess we'll get into this a little bit later.
Yeah, we have a question for that.
So I'll stop for now. But the one other thing I wanted to mention at the end of your deal, you talked about was the character development, because I also was frustrated with the lack of development for Rick. And I feel like at the very end of the book, like, we see his development kind of start moving forward, and then the book ends. Like,
yes, exactly. I was just like, this is what I wanted from Rick, like, further into the book or earlier in the book, because I'm supposed to believe in 3 months he got over all this shit. Like, what?
Right.
Where did this come? Where did woke Rick come from? Because it wasn't from the last chapters.
You could even say that the character development was moving in a good trajectory, and then Rosie showed up. And I'm not kidding. I really didn't like that happened.
And she ruined it all.
So moving on from that to the next question, we already talked about this a little bit, but we could touch on it a little bit more. How did you feel about the author breaking the fourth wall and adding other parenthetical commentary? Like, for example, him telling you to go on YouTube and look up like a scene from Seinfeld so you understand the joke. Did it add to your reading experience, or did it take away from it? And I'll let Barbara start on this one.
So honestly, it was one of the things I actually did enjoy. I didn't get a lot of the references, but the ones I did get, I laughed at. A lot of the movie ones I didn't get, or Seinfeld, like, I've never seen that. Comics and stuff like that I didn't really get, except for, like, outside of watching the MCU movies. But like the Pizza Hut one cracked me up, because I too think Pizza Hut stuffed crust is magical, so I kind of giggled at that scene. As far as did it add anything to the story, I don't really think so, but for this type of a book, I felt like that was okay, because you kind of get to know a little bit more of Rick in that aspect of the book. I feel like I got to know him better when he did those little side comments than when he was just being annoying outside of them. Or not, I shouldn't say annoying.
Were they supposed to be Rick, or were they supposed to be the author?
See, I thought it was
That's
supposed
what
to be
I didn't
Rick,
understand.
because the
Rick
book
was the narrator.
it's first person. So everything that he's talking about is obviously supposed to be Rick, or at least I'm assuming so. That's what I got that. If it was third person, then I would have understood if maybe it was more of like the author commenting.
Yeah.
But first person.
That was confirmed at the end, Barbara, too. And he talks about how like he wrote this book in those 3 months between.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So yeah, the narration is Rick. The character of Rick is the one narrating.
Correct. Yeah. What else? Did it kind of feel weird to have those? Because I didn't see this book as a comedy, since it really does deal with a lot of heavy issues. But it did actually help break up the heavy topics. So I appreciated that, because sometimes I felt like it was a little much, and then he would get these long tangents about like Pizza Hut, or I don't know, a comic book reference or something like that. And that kind of made me giggle, and I was like, oh, okay, that's funny. So I didn't hate it. I thought it added stuff to the story, and it made sense for, like I said, this type of a story. I feel like for anything else, it would have been kind of a little weird. But
yeah, I agree with that last thing you said. I think it made sense here because the main character was also the narrator, and so having the narrator as like having the main character break the fourth wall was okay. Like I said earlier, I really liked it. I thought that they were funny. There were a couple that I didn't get, mostly the Seinfeld ones, because I've never watched that show. But for the most part, I enjoyed the humor, and those were the moments that I laughed while I was reading. Like I said earlier, I also liked the references to the comics and Star Wars and all the other nerdy things that I enjoy as well. I think it added to the experience for me in the book. I 100% agree with that last thing Barbara said about it was nice to have it break up some of the heavier stuff, because there were definitely some heavy topics in this book, and his parentheticals during those moments kind of pulled you out of that a little bit, which wasn't always a bad thing for this story. But I know some people will feel the exact opposite. Lauren, I know some people will feel the exact opposite of that. So,
yeah, I mean, I already touched on how I feel about it, but I think that, and it's just personal preference for me, that the breaking the fourth wall is distracting when I'm reading. Like I said, there were several times when it was really well placed, like comically, and I did laugh and thought it was funny. And also, like, I probably would have enjoyed it if I would have gotten any of his references. I might have enjoyed it a little bit more. But
I think that's the end of the day. That's what makes or breaks this. Like, if you know the references, it makes you cackle. But if you don't, like, you're like, okay.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because I don't watch Seinfeld, and I don't watch Star Wars, and I don't read comic books. So I was just like, there were a few where I was like, oh, I get that or whatever. But for the most part, it was just distracting. And as far as like the YouTube video thing, like, ain't nobody got time for that. I'm trying to read a book. You're not trying to go to YouTube.
I slightly thought about Googling that or YouTubing, and I was like, meh, no.
So
I asked Michael, I was like, do you know what this is? And then he explained it to me. I was like, oh, okay.
I explained it to her because I did that. So like she was, the night that she's talking about, like she was upstairs getting ready for bed and I was reading. And I got to that point in the book where he says to like look up the Seinfeld scene on YouTube, which I had never watched the show. So I did. I looked it up. I watched the scene and it made the joke. Like it was much funnier, that whole part of the book, because of that. And so I'm glad I took the time to do it. And I think Barbara appreciated the joke more when I explained it to her too.
Yes, I did.
I thought that was fine. I get Lauren's perspective too, where she's like, I don't want to get on YouTube, I'm reading. But it did make the joke better. And if you're going to make a pop culture reference, it's cool that he was like, hey, if you want to get this even more, this is what you can watch, or this is what I'm talking about. So that was kind of cool. There were a few scenes in the book with Rick's father, and I want to talk about those scenes. What were your thoughts about them? And I'm actually going to start on this one. So mixed feelings on the scenes. Rick's dad was an asshole. There's no other way you can paint that character. The chapter where we find out what happened the night that he and his mom, did they leave him, or did she kick him out? One way or the other?
She kicked his ass out. Mm-hmm.
She kicked his ass out. Okay. So the night they escaped from everything that he was putting them through and what he was doing to them, which was beating the crap out of them. It was hard to read. It felt very real. aspects of it were told from like young Rick's perspective, which made it even scarier reading that about like that happening to a kid. It was an intense scene. So moving past that, because of that scene, I did feel a sense of retribution in the later scene when he and his dad meet up for lunch. His dad's trying to build a relationship with him. And his dad's an asshole, like I said earlier. And he made some negative comments about Rick's mom and Rick. And so Rick decked him, laid him out at the restaurant. And I was like, yes, go Rick. And then I quickly was like, no, Rick, that's not great. Because after that, he starts like beating the ever-loving crap out of his dad to the point that he saw red. He was kicking him repeatedly on the ground till another man pulled him away. The dad had to go to the hospital. It was this whole thing. And it was too far. But on the flip side of that, the scene did serve to show Rick's anger issues, and that he hasn't gotten over those. And ironically, that he has anger issues just like Dad does. And that was, so in that way, it was a poignant scene, and maybe that was the intention. Maybe that was the author's, maybe that was Zach's idea, is that he would give you a little bit of retribution for the beating the dad did and then take it all away because Rick's going to push it too far and do exactly what his dad did. And that's kind of what happened. So like Barbara said before, I liked this plot arc, but I don't feel like we really got conclusion to it. Like we went from the scene at the barbecue to Rick's dad sending him a letter and him like sending this like very mature note back to him. And after just like, was it 3 months? 3 months before he beat the living crap out of him? Yeah.
Yeah.
And as Barbara said before, that's a lot of growth in 3 months to go from like, I'm going to almost kill you to this is the end and have a nice life. So I liked it and didn't like it because I wanted more of it. I didn't feel like we got really that closure, but those are my thoughts. Lauren, did you have any thoughts on the scenes with Rick's dad?
I just want to say that I thought that Rick's dad was dead until we got to the scenes where he became included. Like, just because he was never mentioned for so long, and like he would say things like, kind of like red herrings, almost to make you think that maybe something had happened. Like you knew that something sinister had happened, like, but I didn't know that it was going to be to the level that it was. So I thought maybe the issue was going to be that he passed away when he was a kid, and he had trauma from that, and he had anger from that, and that was where some of his demons kind of stemmed from. And so then when it took the turn that it did, I was surprised and also just angry and all the other emotions that come with things when you deal with battered women, because I think that that just really no excuse for it. So
that's why I liked his mom, because his mom was like, oh hell no, like don't touch my baby boy, and like get the F out. And he got out. And she wanted nothing to do with that man. Like, I loved his mom. Anytime the dad tried to come in, and she was like, no, like, stay away from him. I want nothing to do with you. So I thought that was done well. Okay, so I feel like it either needed to not exist at all or have been way more fleshed out. It made sense to add it in, since it does explain why Rick has his anger issues and where he has a lot of self-loathing. Like you get little tidbits of him saying like, you're so stupid. Why did you do that? You're an idiot. No one loves you, and that kind of stuff. So all of that makes sense. And because of where it came from, because like his dad said that stuff to him. His dad's like, oh, you're an awful baseball player. Like, why didn't you want to win the game? You're blah, blah, blah. So it makes sense for Rick's character and where that came from. And it was really well written. Anytime we did get to explore him and his father and all of that stuff. But I just wish there were more scenes between him and his dad, because we don't get that much. Like Lauren mentions, like we didn't get any information about his dad except something happened, and Rick didn't want to talk about it until his college years, where he just randomly shows up. I feel like honestly, this should have been the focal point to Rick's overall story instead of the quote unquote love story. I just wanted to learn more and to see Rick grow and get past his anger towards his father, but we never really get that. It felt rushed to me, since he went from almost beating his dad to death, like Michael mentioned, to a well-written note telling his dad off and how he didn't want a relationship with him, from like 3 months that we don't get to experience those 3 months. Don't get me wrong. I loved that note. It was what I wanted Rick to have done in the beginning and just told his dad off. but I get maybe he wanted to try the relationship first. But like, where did that come from? Like, what am I expected to think that Rick from 3 months ago grew that much and we don't get to see that? Like, I would have liked to have seen that growth and not just been told about it. And that was my biggest issue with that.
Next question. Mental health is a pretty big theme in this book. How do you think discussion around this topic was handled by the author? And Barbara, it is your turn to go first.
Yeah, I think it was written well in the sense that you could see that Rick had a ton of issues he had to deal with. The problem I had was that I didn't feel like he really got the help that he needed. He started to, obviously, but I think he left therapy a little too early. I don't think he had control over his anger issues. He was still relying on someone else to bring him happiness, aka Rosie. And it just felt like he wasn't handling his self-loathing really well still. I get that life isn't perfect and you can't just put like this big bow on all of these issues and resolve it really quickly, but it would have been nice to have seen him continue to work on himself and maybe continue to see the therapist and work on himself, because I feel like he just had a lot to still grow from. And once again, that whole 3 months that we didn't get to see, we're just supposed to magically think that he got over all of this stuff. I just feel like that doesn't happen, because clearly, since he was seeing the therapist for a whole freaking year, that didn't happen. A little unbelievable for me, but I enjoyed that it was there. I just felt like it kind of was a side character or a side asterisk, and it should have maybe had a better ending to that part of his overall story.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I think it was written well. I like when we have this aspect in the book where the character struggles with something with their mental health. I think that's great when it gets included. I think that Zach wrote about those things accurately. He obviously has some experience with that outside of his writing life. But like Barbara said, I was not a fan of the fact that it seemed like Rick never really worked on his stuff. And like, so the therapy that we do see, he was doing it, like Barbara said, for a year. And they talk about one of the things they're going to work on is like getting him ready to meet up with his dad. Right. And I think what would have been cool to see from my perspective is like him working on it. And then while seeing the therapist, go see the dad. And maybe the same thing happens, right? So he goes there, he snaps, he beats the crap out of a dad, and then see him go back to therapy after that to keep working on it.
Exactly.
At the end of the book, he still has an anger problem. As far as we are told anyway, he never went back to therapy after that incident. Like, he finished therapy. The therapist is like, you're doing great. You've got this all under control. And then Rick goes to lunch with his dad and beats him to the end of his life.
Any therapist, sorry to jump in here, but any therapist that would look at his clinical picture profile and say that he was good to go should be reevaluated by their licensing board.
I mean, I feel like the problem with that is he could have lied. He could have lied and be like, "Oh yeah, I got control of this."
Yeah.
Like, he's either a
really good actor.
Yeah. He's an unreliable narrator because it's Rick that's giving us like. So that could have just been an unreliable telling of the story. He just stopped going and said it that way. I don't know, but
true. I'm just saying, like, from a clinical standpoint, I mean, he was still showing signs of having anger issues. Unless he was just like a really good actor towards the therapist, I think that there's like, so solution-focused brief therapy, right, is designed for situations where you're going to... I
like how you say right, like we know what you're talking about. We're not that smart, Lauren.
Sorry. It's just basically like you're focusing on solutions, but you're also like only meeting with them for a brief time. So like 6 weeks or like 4 weeks or 8 weeks, or like it's like a time with an end to your goals or whatever. But the kinds of issues that he has, I don't think would have been adequately resolved or addressed even in a 12-week time frame, which is kind of what they were looking at. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
I appreciate your 2 cents. It was your turn to talk anyway, so that worked out perfectly that you jumped in right at the end of mine. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Lauren, before we move on to the next question?
No, that was it. I do think that Zach, obviously with his degrees and things that he has that background in psychology. And so he obviously knows how to write about mental health issues. And so I appreciated that. But I also do think that it would have been nice to have the answer to the question of, like, did Rick leave therapy of his own accord? Did he, like, was he being honest? Was he, like, or even see some, like you said, Michael, like some continuity of care happening after the reintroduction to Dad was happening, and just kind of to go along with that story a little bit more, since this is supposed to be kind of his coming of age. I feel like that would have been nice to see some closure on that.
I will note that the scene where Rick and Rosie break up and Rick goes like ham on his fists and himself and the wall and the glass mirror and shatters it, like was well written in the sense that I was like so like off put of Rick doing that and seeing that type of an anger issue. You don't normally see that. So it was well written to the point where I was like disturbed by it because it was
it makes you
written.
Concerned. Like I was concerned for Rosie, and I was concerned for like any future female partners that this guy has.
Same. I was like, holy crap, like that's well written to the point where I was freaked out, and I was like, okay, well.
Oh yeah, it was a very uncomfortable scene, and I was also concerned for Rosie and future female partners, but I was concerned for Rick too. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, he literally punches himself.
To, like, beating up yourself. Like, I mean, and it goes back to like the thing you were talking about before, like his self-loathing. I think that was like a physical expression of his self-loathing, and it was not healthy at all. But it was very well written. Right, it was very uncomfortable to read, and
he also had a lot of different times throughout the book where he would like have that negative self-talk that like the author did a good job of like displaying that, since it was written from Rick's perspective, that like you got to hear some of those like inner thoughts that you might not get to hear if it wasn't written that way. So like, Rick, you're such a effing idiot, or like you're like the worst person ever. I noticed that there was a lot of negative self-talk happening that would also kind of helped to gain some understanding from that mental health side.
I liked that he included that. I think it framed Rick's mindset better. And if you had just had like the events happening without some of that inner self-talk, like it would have been more confusing. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think I liked that he included that. So at the end of the book, Rick and Rosie get together. Did you like that? Lauren is answering the question before I can finish asking it. Did you like that they ended up together, or did you think that they should have stayed apart? I'm going to answer this one first. So I'm just going to open up this answer with, I did not like Rosie as a character. I didn't like her in high school when they were dating. I didn't like her throughout college when she would randomly pop up. I didn't like her at the end of the book. I didn't like her in Paris. I didn't like Rosie. So throughout the book, they have a 2-week high school relationship that ends the way that high school relationships end, dramatically and things like that. And that's not what I was implying, but that is what happened. Is she?
Every high school relationship ends with porn.
So like it does, and I'll say this for the listeners. So it does end because they're hanging out at Rick's house. She goes back to his room to get her jacket, and either the computer turns on its own, or she invades Rick's privacy and turns on his computer, and regardless of what happens, there's 5 tabs or something like that.
Porn everywhere.
And Barbara and I had to talk about that because I understand why she left him because of her like life views, and she was very conservative and all those things. I had a problem with, we didn't know if it was like that she went in and like got on his computer without his permission, or if it was just like maybe he like got a notification and it turned on.
Okay, but don't leave your porn up on your computer. One,
I agree.
That's what I said. If you're gonna do that,
don't be looking.
Let's not focus on the leaving it on. Let's focus on, like, it's still an invasion of privacy. Like, would you not be upset if someone went in and like just got on your computer and started looking at your emails or something?
It's an invasion of my relationship if my significant other or love interest is looking at porn behind my back.
Also, both of those things are accurate. I'm just saying that the privacy part of it is accurate.
Yeah, but he could have talked to her, and instead he was just like, "Oh, nothing happened."
Yeah.
Well, and then he even got mad at her. He's like, "You went through my you didn't have like." He was mad about the fact of the privacy issue.
Like, bro, if you're gonna do that, like, hide the fact. Be a better hider. I'm sorry.
And there very much there are 2 issues at hand. There's the issue of him doing that and not talking to her about it, like having a mature conversation, which we can't entirely blame either of them for because they were like in like sophomores in high school or something at this point. But or seniors. They're in high school. They're high school age kids. And then the fact that, I mean, yeah, the whole privacy aspect, any of it. Anyway, they the relationship ends after 2 weeks, and somehow for the rest of the book, Rick is head over heels in love with this person that he's only ever spent 2 weeks with in a relationship, and then periodically sees throughout college. Like I don't know. So the whole time that Rosie is in college, or they're in college, she's coming back and she's seeing Rick. And he makes it clear that he still likes her, and Rosie's dating Jason, her second high school boyfriend, this whole time. And they're like having like semi-romantic get-togethers, and then she gets engaged to Jason, and they're still having like this whole thing. Like she is stringing Rick along and giving him like this little, like there's just enough hope to keep him on the hook. As like almost like a backup. I don't know. I don't know if Rick was the backup or if Jason was the backup, or the way that was all described is kind of confusing, because at the end she's like, I've been waiting for you to become the man I knew you could be. And it's like, okay, well, what about Jason then? You've been engaged to him for all anyway. But so I didn't like Rosie, so I didn't like they ended up together. She strung along both of them, in my opinion, and is a very toxic human being. In this case, they ended up together, which is great. Happy ending. Rick's in love with her, I guess, and all that. But I really liked the last bit of the book before that happened, because you finally see like Rick. You see Rick in a moment at the Steph and Drew's engagement party where he almost seems to like be okay with being him without Rosie, without all this other shit that's going on. Like he's okay with being himself. And then all of a sudden she shows up and it's like, Rick, I left Jason.
And he ruins it.
I'm here. And it's like, what? No, let Rick be Rick. Like he's been obsessed with this girl for all of this time. Like, anyway.
It's so toxic. No. The whole thing is toxic.
That was a long-winded answer for me to just say no. I did not like that they ended up together, and I was kind of hoping that they wouldn't end up together after everything that happened. And from there, I'll let Lauren answer.
Yeah, I mean, I did not like that they ended up together. I did not like Rosie, the Rosie character. I did not like the Rick character either. And it wasn't like that I don't like the way that he was written necessarily. The writing was fine, but he's just an unlikable character to me, personally. Also, like, how many different ways do you gentlemen reference jerking off? Because this book was, like, eye-opening in the sense that, like, I almost asked my husband, like, how many different ways can you say jerked off? There were some, like, jerkin the gherkin. That cracked me up. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think that there was a lot with their very short relationship that was troublesome to me. Part of it was just how adamant he was on like pushing her further and further. She just like the different bases, right? Like when they're experimenting and making out, and then his friends are like, oh dude, she wants it. And like, I just was disgusted at that whole situation. And I would not doubt that that's what you hear in locker rooms and different things, but that doesn't make it any better for me. And so the fact that they were egging him on to do it, and then also the fact that he just really wasn't taking no for an answer, I did not enjoy that. And then the fact that, like, I don't know, like, how did these two people end up together, and how is, like, their toxic story supposed to be a happy ending to me? Because I feel like he had finally worked on himself a little bit. He had finally, like you said, Michael, he had finally gotten to a place where, like, he was accepting what was happening, and then all of a sudden she comes back and he's just like, oh God, like I gotta, happily ever after with you. And it's like, no, like I don't know. So the long of the short of it, there's too many phrases for jerking off. They should not have ended up together. And yeah, that's my take.
Barbara.
It's true. I also did not like their love story, quote unquote, at all. Like I mentioned before, we didn't get to see much of it. I didn't understand why Rick was so in quote unquote love with her. It felt like he was just obsessed or hung up on her. They barely date in high school, like Michael mentioned, like 2 weeks. They date for 2 weeks, and they kind of knew each other a little bit beforehand because he was really determined to know her as a human, I guess. And then when they do break up, they rarely talk to each other after they break up, and it's the end of their senior year. We get a small scene between them during their freshman year of college when she comes down and they have that awkward ice cream date. And then we get another small scene during their junior year with with like a few like they texted back and forth sprinkled scenes throughout the rest of the story. And then the whole flying to Paris to tell the woman you apparently love that you love her, not to marry some other dude happens, right? And then she shows up magically at the end and they're together again. Like what? Where? I was just lost from all that. Like the author doesn't show us why we should root for these two to get together. Rather, he tells us in asides from Rick. And Rick isn't that great at asides about his love life. So I don't want to be told why they love each other. Like show me why they care for each other. I did not understand their love story. I also felt like it was creepy when Rick first saw her. He tried describing it as though it was supposed to be like this whole love at first sight thing, but really he just came off sounding possessive, as if he wanted to own her. Like he was like, oh, I want to have her. No one else can. I have to grab her before someone else can. Like, that's not cute. Let's also not forget how crappy Rosie was as well. Just like Michael mentioned, Rick is not all in the wrong. Rosie also has some issues. She was fine in the beginning. I didn't really have an issue with her because, like, you don't really get to know her. He's trying to get to know her, and then he pretty much breaks her arm. And then they start dating. So we get to know a little bit more about her history, and that was interesting. I didn't mind her then. But then they just kind of break up, and after that, she just strings two dudes along. Like, she stays with Jason, even though she obviously doesn't love him enough, as she waits around for, like, Rick to get his crap together. And then she dumps poor Jason, like a bad habit, after Rick supposedly does get his crap together. Like, she should have never dated Jason in the first place, or at least not agreed to marry the poor dude. Like, if you knew all along that you were just settling at that point, you should have not said yes, and then told the dude, oh, hey, by the way, wait, and then 3 months you're engaged or whatever, and then decide that you're not engaged anymore. Like, what happened there? So, no, I don't like that they ended up together. I was actually thinking it was going to be one of these stories because I've read a book before like this where he's like, oh, no one dies at the end. And then clearly a character dies at the end. And he was like, oh, just kidding. Like, I just didn't want you guys to think about that not happening or something like that. And I was thinking that was going to happen here, where he was like, oh, yeah, she's like the love of my life, and this is our love story, and we end up together. And then, like, at the end, I was expecting him to be like, just kidding. Like, that's not how real life works. But just kidding. That didn't happen.
Yeah. That was, I agree with a lot of what you just said. And the fact that she was also, I guess, seeing Rick and texting Rick all the time she was dating Jason too, which we don't
supposedly
see all of those
we don't
things,
see any of that, but supposedly that's happening, which is also crappy of her.
Yeah, super. So next question: was the book the right length? Were there parts you wanted the author to expand on, or sections that you thought should be shorter? And Barbara, you could start on this one.
So it's one of those weird questions. Like, I think it could have been longer, just because if the author wanted to include all this stuff, I only say that because of all the subplots that were happening that deserved their due to get told. Like, there was some interesting stuff that I wanted to read more about that I didn't get. So we needed more love story if that's what the author wanted to go for, was the love story. We needed more Dad and Rick's story, or more resolving Rick's issues story, or more I Heart Steph and Drew's story. Like, I wanted more of that kind of stuff, but I didn't really get any of it. So, that could have been longer, or honestly, like I mentioned before, it could have been the same length, but we could have cut out some of these stuff to focus on one or two things instead. I would have happily read more about these characters, honestly, because I didn't enjoy the way the author wrote them. Make Rick more likable at the end, or make Rosie not crappy either. Like, give me something here. So was the book the right length? It depends, I feel like, on what he could have done with it.
So I originally wrote down on this that I thought that the length was good. And I think the more time I spent away from the book and thinking about it and taking these notes and talking to Barbara and Lauren about it, I agree with what Barbara said. I I think it should have been longer. If the book stays in its original, the way it sits right now with all the subplots and stories, then it should have been longer so we could actually get more information about that. So yeah, I think it should have been a little bit longer, or again, like Barbara said, if it was going to be this short, then cut some of that other stuff out to make it more focused. I really did enjoy the characters, like she said, as well. I liked the relationships. I liked the dialogue. I would have read more of that too. So I would have, truthfully, if you were asking me and said, like, should I have made this longer? Or should I have made it shorter? I would have said longer, because it would have been good to have some closure to some of these other stories that were in the book. Lauren?
So I think that the length would have been the same, because I would have cut out several of the chapters that I felt had unnecessary stuff in it, and then added some of like what Barbara talked about, expanding on some of the more of the subplots. So like if you cut out the rape chapter, if you cut out the just several of the other things that I felt like didn't add anything to the story and replace them with something that did, I think that the length would have been fine.
All right, so moving on from there, we're going to get to probably our most intense question of the podcast. We're going to talk about some not fun stuff. So Rick and other male characters in this book have some toxic viewpoints when it comes to masculinity and how to treat women and how to talk about women. Could this have been approached differently? And the last question, is there ever a good reason to include these kinds of things and these kinds of characters in a modern book? And I'm going to start on this one. So it's frustrating as a guy to read these viewpoints in books, because it's written in this book in a way that implies that all men are like this, which is patently untrue. Do high school age guys think about sex a lot? Yeah, they do. Can they control themselves around women and show willpower? Yeah, they can. And I hate that this book implies that men are just like biologically built to be like misogynistic douchebags. There was a point where Rick says that like all men have this come to Jesus moment and decide like, well, now I'm going to be a good man and just have one girlfriend and not have sex with everybody and cheat on my girlfriend and my wife. I'm going to be a good person. And it's like, no, that is such BS. Like that, I never had a come to Jesus moment where I was like, all right, I'm going to stop being a promiscuous person now and looking at women like objects. Like that doesn't happen to everybody. I'm not sitting here arguing that there aren't men out there that are this way, because there are. Like I know that there are, but the fact that this book is written in a way that's saying that like it's generalizing men is frustrating. And so I think that it's BS, that the implication that it's just biological and men just can't help being this way. I think it could have been approached differently and should have been approached differently. I didn't like how it was approached, and I don't think there's any good reason to do it that way. There's ways to show that high school age teenage boys have gross thoughts about girls and sex without letting those gross thoughts drift into misogynistic, rapey areas. The last question is interesting here, because I think that there maybe could be a place for a character with some of these characteristics and thoughts in a book. Maybe if they're the antagonist, or even if it's the protagonist and we get a redemptive character arc where they start off being this like misogynistic D-bag and then they see the error of their ways. That's all right. But I just didn't like that it was generalized and it was the current day narrator saying that this is just how all men are. That it was frustrating to read. I really specifically, I know Barbara's going to give some quotes in hers, but there was a particular chapter that you could just cut it out of the book. I'm all right with that. Anyway, those are my 2 cents. I'll let Lauren talk about it now.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara's going to cover a lot of what I already agree with, too, because I've looked at the notes, and I'm going to let her do that. But I agree. I think that maybe if you're trying to create a character that's a misogynist that has that viewpoint, like Michael said, maybe give it a character arc at the end to, like, come back and say that that's not. I don't understand how Rick can have that mentality about, like, what does that bring to the story, I guess. And then also, like, to have him in his different scenes with the different girls and ending up with Rosie and his, like, happy ending or whatever. Like, I just feel like the portrayal of men was, I mean, and maybe as a teenage character, he's writing from the perspective of, like, that he really did believe that all guys think that way. You know, I don't know. Just to give him or the author the benefit of the doubt there. But I know there's plenty of men in my life that are not that. Like, they didn't have some magical moment where they decided that they were going to stop. I mean, some people that I know, like, had crazy party days in college and probably objectified and took advantage of women, and not in, like, the rape scene sense in that way at all, but, like, were a little bit more promiscuous or had some one-night stands or whatever, and then they decided, okay, like, it's time to grow up and do something with my life and settle down and blah, blah, blah. Like, I know people with that story arc, but they didn't, at the same time, those people didn't ever, like, view women as just, like, something to bone or, like, so, like, just objectific. Like, I don't know. So I think that, and then I know men that are, you know, super respectful of women, and, like, it's, I don't know. And the porn culture is an issue in itself because it creates that in men, as far as, like, it creates that in anybody, just the objectifying people and women especially, and it just kind of reinforces that culture. And so I think that it's all bad for that.
Yeah, so I have the most problem with chapter 10 of this book. It's extremely problematic for me. It's pretty much rape mentality at its finest, if you ask me. Honestly, if this chapter wasn't included whatsoever, I don't think it would have changed anything about the story. I mean, except for the aspect of, like, the author explains why Rick has a porn addiction. And I feel like you can do that in some other way instead of how he did it personally. But yeah, let's dive into some of these really fun quotes, shall we? That I briefly mentioned why I wanted to put the book down at one point and not continue reading. It's because of this. So, quote, "Take 1,000 years of human existence in which men had sex with whomever, whatever, and whenever we wanted without repercussion, and cram that into a culture in which men have to not only wait for a woman who agrees to have sex with them, but is shamed for having these urges. If I stop and think about it, masturbation is truly the only safe method by which a male can take care of his 1,000 years of evolution without going outside of the norms of modern society. AKA, we can only masturbate so we don't go and rape people," is essentially what I'm getting from that. Like, I don't know
that quote and it's just
right. Right. Like, I read that, I put the book down, I looked at Michael and I said, what? Like, I get that the author is trying to have this viewpoint of the 16-year-old guy. I get that some guys at that age will have that mentality, but I feel like just to write it in that way is really sickening to me. It's just pretty much saying, like, oh, we can't control ourselves. The other one is, so the only place that is left to try and limit your intake of smut is at school or work. But anyone with 2 eyes knows that the women at those places not only want you to look at them, but expect you to. And they sure dress to make sure you do that. That's not true. I'm sorry, but if as a guy you think we, females or women or anyone who identifies as a female, dresses for the male audience or for anyone to look at, that, like, that is wrong. Like, when I want to feel,
some people might,
sure, but I mean, some people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, sometimes it is nice, you want to dress sexy and get a compliment here and there, but for the most part, like, that isn't really true. Like, when we're feeling sexy and when we're feeling good about ourselves, we want to look like that. Like, we want to feel good about ourselves. Like, it's not for you guys to come and look at us and be making creepy comments to us. Like, that's not the point of that. And for him to say that is why we do that is just inherently wrong, and it's not true at all.
Yeah, it really just shows a lack of, like, female perspective.
Exactly. There. Like, that's not how that happens. Another thing I wasn't a huge fan of a same chapter was the whole Steph and Rick are talking about Rick wanting to have sex with Rosie, but she's pretty much said, like, hey, no, I don't want to do that. And the guys are all talking, and Steph goes, and those rules are pretty hard and fast, with the exception of the usual tricks of I love you or getting them drunk or just waiting them out for months. Pretty much saying if you tell someone I love you, they'll have sex with you but you really don't feel that way, or waiting until they're drunk, like that's not consent and that's rape. Sorry, it is what it is. Or you just wait it out. Like those are your three options. Like how about you just be a decent human being and the person will actually enjoy your company and actually want to do that stuff. How about that? Like,
well, and she never even took it off the table entirely. She said, like, I want to take it slow.
Right. It's just that, like, I didn't enjoy any of that stuff. The chapter 10 is just worthless. Like, at first I started giggling because it starts off with the whole, what Lauren mentioned was like the masturbation thing. And like, he talks about that and like how guys hide their boners in certain ways during school.
That part was
funny. Like I've heard that from guys, you know, in high school saying that's how they hit it and all that stuff. Like I understand. Okay, cool. Whatever. It was kind of funny, like, haha. But then he turns it into like why guys have a problem with masturbation and why guys have a problem with porn, because early on they see all these stimuli and they can't control themselves and they don't have any willpower. And the whole reason why guys cheat on people is because they are biologically meant to spread their seed in the world and all this stuff. And that's why they cheat until they find someone where they don't want to cheat anymore. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I get that this is, like I said, it was really hard for me to pull myself away from this and be like, is this really how it is? Or is it just him trying to portray what 17-year-old guys are thinking? Because if that's the case, we need to do better. Like, honestly, we need to do better as a society if that's the way guys really are thinking. And I think that's what it stems down to. And that's the problem I had with this. Do I think this is necessary in a modern book? I don't know. I've never read this, to be honest with you. I've never read a point of view like this before, ever.
Me neither.
Like Michael said, you know, maybe it's there and then the person grows up and they learn that, hey, that's not really the case and all this stuff.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. I mean, like, yeah. So moving on from there, let's talk about the ending of the book. So as our normal question, was the ending satisfying? And I think, Barbara, it's your turn to go first, right?
Yeah, no, the ending was fine. Like, as far as him ending up with Rosie, I didn't care about that. I liked the whole Steph and Drew ending and how they got engaged and they threw a little party, and that was fun. And I did enjoy when Rick ran out to tell his mom like how much he appreciated her and how much he loved her and what she meant to him. I really, really, really liked that. As far as like ending with all these, like, I feel like we didn't get closure on a lot of stuff. So as part of that, of the ending, like, I wasn't a fan of that. I felt like we were just getting to like Rick understanding himself and it just ends. So
yeah, I have a lot of similar thoughts about that. So my answer was not really. I didn't like that so many things were left open-ended. We only got closure on the one part of the book I was least invested in, which was Rick's relationship with Rosie. And even then, is that really closure? Like, we're going to be together now after, anyway. And actually, it's the next sentence in my notes. The closure you get isn't even what I wanted. Like, I want to know, does Rick continue therapy? Does he continue to work on his relationship with his dad? Does he feel like, or I feel like the book tried to tell so many stories, like I said earlier, and some of the stories were great, others not so much, but we never really got an ending to a lot of those stories, and that was frustrating as a reader to not figure out what happened. So that's my thoughts on it. Like the ending was, it could have been more satisfying if there was more closure to all the different plot points that were happening. Lauren? I
agree with Michael. I think that more closure was necessary for the ending, and I hate that he ended up with Rosie. But I already touched on that earlier. So,
final question, guys. What were your thoughts on Rick's relationship with his mother? And so I know Barbara's got quite a bit to say on this topic, so I'm not going to say too much. But I liked Rick's relationship with his mom. I really, I don't know. It felt real. Like Barbara said earlier, I liked like how nurturing and caring she was with him, and some of that stuff all clicked more into place when like we found out what happened with Dad. I really liked that. That was actually, to go back to our last question, that was my favorite part of the ending, was the scene with his mom at the very end. Because I know Barbara's going to talk about that scene too, so I'm not going to go into detail on it. But I really liked the mom's character. She was my second favorite character in the book. And so yeah, I I really, really liked it. I thought it was well written. It felt like a real relationship between a teenager and his mom, and then a young man and his mom. So,
yeah, I mean, I feel like I've already mentioned this as a highlight of the book was his relationship with his mom. I liked every interaction. I enjoyed when, not enjoyed like in that sense, but it was very well written when Rick was telling his mom about the whole breakup with Rosie in high school, and like she just like cradled him and said it was going to be okay. That scene was really nice, and I also enjoyed that she didn't like bash Rosie. Like she didn't know what was going on, but sometimes people are like, well, she's a bitch anyways. Like she didn't do any of that. She just said like, oh, it's okay, honey, and all that stuff. I thought that was really cool. I liked that scene with Rick. It made me like him a little bit more because he was very vulnerable in that sense. And all the other chapters or scenes that we get with him and his mom were all done very well, and I really enjoyed them. And honestly, I looked forward to those scenes, and I thought it was very well written. So obviously I liked it.
I also really liked that scene. I forgot to mention that where you were talking about that, where he tries to lie to his mom and say everything's fine, and then it's like, but no, mom can always tell, and then he just like collapses to the floor. It was a powerful scene, but it was a cool scene. So moving on from that, let's talk about our individual scores. We already went over our group score, which again is a 6.25 out of 10 for this one. Barbara, do you want to give us your score first?
Yeah, it was a 6.25. That was my score.
She's the average.
Yay, I'm the average. It's the author's a good writer. The writing style is well done. I just feel like there's a lot of problematic things with it. Too much plot going on for such a short book. Honestly, that's why I scored it what it was.
Lauren?
I gave it a 6, and I think that was partially due to my dislike of the fourth wall breaking. As far as the writing style goes, I do think he's a talented artist. Well, writers are artists. Talented writer. But I do think there was some problematic plot stuff happening and just problematic subject matter and different things that I personally did not appreciate. So.
And I'm right along there with him. I gave it a 6.5 out of 10 for all the reasons that they mentioned and all the reasons that I've mentioned previously. I also think that Zach is a great writer, very, very talented there, and look forward to maybe reading something else that he writes later on too. So group score, like I said, was a 6.25 out of 10. And I think that that'll wrap up this episode for this month. Thank you guys so much for listening. As always, we are Badass Literature Society. Hope you liked the episode. Let us know if you did. Leave us a rating. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Amazon or wherever you listen. Please give us a rating. That'd be awesome. If you don't already, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. That's where we communicate with you guys. And if you've got a book you want us to listen to, let us know. Our handle in both places is at Badass Lit Pod. With that, we'll see you guys next month. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
I'm Lauren.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.